Welcome to TradeTheMBA.com. This is John's reports for the 7th of October. Well, we had a little P2 developing setup here with the rising red NBI and still caught in sort of a middle zone here where we're in kind of continuation, which in this particular case is sort of sideways across, but we did have that nice V shape with those red NBIs moving below the zero level. What were we, just the 10.1, 0.37, so under zero from that standpoint. And it was enough once we got the magenta over. We saw it starting in the pre-market where the white was above, and then by, I guess, midday or so, it had flipped and solid magenta leading above that. And of course, steel is still rising over the DOC cyan. So those are bullish aspects. The failure of it, orange to dip further, makes it problematic a bit for the bull case. But red DOC rising into a new zone could be enough to get it back in place. But we flirted again right down at that same low level. In this particular case, we got down to 73, just above that 60 range. We've been talking before, and of course the NASDAQ looking far weaker, but once you had that magenta spike back up, certainly it was enough. And of course some of this was off the rumors that the debt ceiling was solved for now. Until the next thing. Doesn't change some of the inherent weakness within some of the broader setup, but you can see that DOC orange here for the NASDAQ dipping lower, so that's a bit more positive. I usually look for like a -9 range on a 50K or daily setup. Now it's at -11, so that creates that bullish, particularly when you have that magenta rising, and now you've got everything turning up, and potentially you could have even a cross of the blue above the gray line down there as well. And so it's not shown on here, but if you look at it by adding the D-red, which is another thing you can do just by editing indicator, always worth pointing that out, and the blue X line is what that would be, and that would be just a matter of clicking a 1 and it will update. And that's the same with all of the setups. So there you can see it, blue crossing above the gray line right there. Now, of course, we always look for those lower pivots. So if it pivots back up and then comes back down, that's going to present a whole separate opportunity. Of course, we'll see where price is at that particular stage. But it was a strong comeback towards the end of the day. When we look at other aspects, though, they're still problematic. Euro continuing its decline. Bonds came back a bit from where they were, and again, there's just no getting around the oil spike. The easing right here helped that quite a bit, but you're still in quite an elevated area, and of course that's just a fill of the positive extreme that took place from before. So it's no shocking, it hasn't really changed its overall look. That NBI readings here with the magenta and yellow staying strong to the positive certainly bodes for continuation. This was also an interesting one too, because we ended up Bitcoin we'd seen, and the same was with Ethereum, where it had the 34K as a real blocking point, and once it was able to move back above it, that was just the catalyst that just drove it. And again, this is going to serve as that secondary gold hedge for what looks to be the beginning of a significant bull market for gold in that aspect. I sent out this setup, which was the Opus T. Just a little bit so you can see it fits within there, and this is basically just for the year to date, and showing those percentages. We ended up dipping just below 50 on the last couple little shorts that took place here. From a performance graph standpoint, that's excellent. And also when we look at periodic returns, pretty darn impressive overall. So that really works well, and there's still a lot of adjustment to do, because as it follows some of these buys, as you can see, we would want to move back towards the break in the yellow dots from here, and then also from a short standpoint. I usually look for the pivot up, like we were talking about here, of the blue. In this case, you have magenta, and it's above that as well as the dip. And so that would cover a little bit lower. So there's going to be a few more adjustments, but you can see already how effective it is, even without some of those alterations. And particularly, I'll probably be adding a secondary short within the setup, which would be the crosses of white above the orange line. Which tend to be very effective from mid to short-term ranges. In fact, we'll see that on the intraday. So from intraday, if we look at the little yellow dots, which in the MBI paint bar, which I'll send out as soon as I can get my adjustments to the new buy setups. Ones that came in like here, still within that yellow. And then we ended up with, which was these chartreuse buys that took place right here. But the gap took place right about there at the 85 range, and you can see bought it all the way back up to 100%. It was clear with that MBI white staying all the way down low, well into the red. And then first indication was that initial pop right there. A little early to take that one because you still had, and I'm not too concerned when I see cyan under red in that particular case, particularly when you've reached over the 7.5 for red DOC. That's getting pretty extreme. But the secondary move, which took place right there at the cross of red on the much lower, below 33 level of the orange net, and that led, of course, again to move back lower. And then you can see the orange dots, and then right as it ended, the yellow took in place, said, nope, don't buy that just yet. And then finally, first break took place right in there, about 87 range, and that spiked up pretty well. And what happened was you had the magenta clearly over in that particular stage, and then you never even had a white dip back underneath. Now, that's not always a problem because usually you can take that first up pivot when it takes place, but in this particular case, you didn't have an indication that you were going to be moving to a zero stage at that particular point, and sure enough, it popped right back up to the highs. And then we did get a spike that took place over here, but was coming right off the pretty significant shakeout. It was still pretty good play, and in this case, again, same situation where white dipped just below and then popped right back above it at that particular point. And then, of course, you look for the continuation where the white continues over orange like that to know that you're really moving lower. And then there's that same up pivot with magenta popping back above, and that's exactly right where the turnaround took place. And then we get a couple more of those interesting ones where, in this case, the white doesn't dip below the red, pivots back up. Reasonable to take, but the expectation is not to the zero in that particular, since you had such a larger spike of the magenta in that particular case. And then we ended up with almost a similar construct. This time the white, however, did pop above it, but the turnaround was pretty quick, and you had no crossover from the white continuing to the orange. So that was pretty much the end case for it there. And then that led to the news that broke out about it. And it was interesting how we played beautifully along that 4307 pretty much most of the day, slightly above, and then it kept fading down below to the lower one and then back up again. And then once they were able to hold it just above that range, boom, took off from there. And that's pretty much how it ended in this particular case. I'm always reluctant in working the code on that setup when you move above this magenta, above 25. Any dip is likely to be just a short-lived respite within there. And then, of course, when the next set of weakness came, it was with DOC, cyan under red, which still very bullish when you have that full reset of the steel. So it didn't take much. It wasn't a bad signal to take place in that particular case. It's just you had such strong upside pressure with the complete reset that it didn't take much for a dip to satisfy it. It still dipped down to 50%, which is more than enough within that configuration. Be perfectly fine with that. But then again, there you have that magenta turnaround. That was pretty strong. And then, of course, green DOC over cyan, and that led to the push going into the after hours. Now, when that does reach the turnaround point where you're fading and white moving back up, the expectation would be to the zero, but you can already see how fast the 0% is rising. So it may not be much of a dip before the 0% catches up to it. It'd probably be, usually in these divergent cases, oftentimes where that original spike takes place is usually about where it ends up meeting the 0% line. That would be right around the 43.40 there. And that would be several more bars later. It's going to take in the aftermarket in order for that to take place. So we'll see how that pans out. The next step will be obviously adjusting Opus in that for 5K chart. Now that the 50K is good, and with some of those little adjustments I was just talking about that need to be done on the 50K, extraordinarily reliable, and a lot of the details that I like to look at, and something to pay attention to in your performance reports. If I put it back up there, and look at the summary. This average winning trade relative to the average losing, and I like to look for about a 1 and 1.5 times the loss sector. So in this case, it's more than double. So that's really effective, particularly on the long side, very strong, and even more so on the short side as well. So that's what produces those nice profit factors, because you're getting twice as much from your victories than you do takeaways from the losses. Decent RINA, which is select profit in that versus drawdown. So that's excellent number. And the fact that we're almost 73.5% of the time in the market, which means it's very active. So that's all the qualities that you kind of want in an overall setup, and we know that we're going to get some improvement. And the adjustments that you have already have some of the features for the changes in inputs that just give a little bit of adjustment to some of these, but as you can see, there's some exits in that we definitely want to add to the efficiency of and improve. So all good. As always, though, I will be on the Skype chat. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.